I'm grateful to be able to bring the word today. Um, I'm mostly grateful that you guys have allowed me to come out of my hole because normally I'm hiding in the back doing production stuff. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be set free. Amen. Let me get out and breathe a little bit. Um, but if you guys recall, in the beginning of the year, we set a challenge for the house. We were going to go through each book of the Bible to the end of the year, with the exception of a few one-offs every other week. And so we're going to continue on with that. I believe the last time we were in Judges, and now we're moving over to First Samuel. So we'll be in First Samuel, and we're going to start actually in chapter 8 of First Samuel. And if we have to, we're going to look at a snapshot in the life of Samuel, who was a judge, who served as a judge in this time where God ruled by judges. And if you need a refresher, in 1 Samuel chapter 1, there was a woman named Hannah. She could not bear a son. She prayed to God, did an immaculate prayer in chapter 2, and the Lord rewarded her with a son, and she dedicated that child to the Lord. And Samuel was a God-fearing, God-loving man. He was dedicated to God. He lived every day in full dedication to him. And so here he is in chapter 8, and we're about to look at an instance that I feel like is really, really, really going to be helpful for the house. So I pray that you will have an open heart and an open mind today. All right? Is that good? That the Holy Spirit can push some things into us and help us as a body continue to push further towards him. So let's start at chapter 8, verse 1. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Behold, you are old." There's a few people in here today that will slap somebody silly if they declared it like that, straight to your face. "Behold, you is old. You old. You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." Now, we're going to stop right there because there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to take a look at two wrongs. Everybody's heard the phrase, two wrongs don't make a right, right? We're going to take a look at two wrongs here. The first wrong we're going to look at is Samuel's wrong. Well, Pastor Jakarie, you just said he was a man of God. He is, but here Samuel has made a mistake. And let's pull that out. The mistake that he made was he overlooked his son's sins. He overlooked the way that his sons were ruling. Now, again, this was a time where judges were in place. God would appoint a judge in order to complete a task that he had set, and turn the people's attention back to him. This was the time of judges. Now, the difference here is God appointed the next judge. God always raised up the next judge. Samuel appointed his sons. Y'all following me? The issue here is not that he's wrong to want his children to follow in his footsteps. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with loving your kids and wanting them to serve God in the capacity that you serve God. That's a beautiful thing. It's a thing that each parent should want, that their children should serve the Lord God as much as they have, or even more so than they have. The problem was he loved them so much that he was blinding himself to the truth of the matter, and he couldn't find himself in a place where he would stand up and say, "Oh, Whoa, sons. Perhaps this is not the position you were supposed to be in. Perhaps this is not the way that God wanted. If I had consulted God, he would have let me know that you guys were not the fit. You guys were not the fit. This is not what God would desire. It made sense for him to want his children to walk in the same way that he walked. But he was letting too much slide. Now, I can't prove this fully, so don't take this as law, as word. But this isn't the first time that we see this in Samuel's life. If we take a step back a few chapters before, Samuel had a mentor named Eli. Eli had a couple of sons that were serving as priests. And the Bible says that they were useless and wicked. They would mess with the women that were coming to the temple. They would unjustly take what should have been for sacrifice, meat that was given for sacrifice, and they would take whatever portion they desired. They were just all over the place with the rules. And you got to think, Samuel's been brought up in this way because as soon as he was born, he was dedicated here and was under Eli's teaching. He's seen this before. What I'm saying is, when we're looking at our lives, perhaps sometimes there may be some things that we grew up around that we were not told were not the way that things should go. So therefore, it takes the Lord who knows the heart to come and bring something up and say, hey, this thing that you feel is normal, it doesn't feel sinful right away. But I'm telling you that this thing is just going to get in the way because you have two opposing wheels going on. Okay? So it's not the first time. It makes sense for Samuel to be lenient on his own sons. But as a judge, it was his duty to stand in the way and say, oh, this isn't the way this has to go. This isn't God's will. Now we're going to look at Israel for a second. Remember I said two wrongs. We have Samuel's wrong. Now let's get to Israel's wrong. Again, in verse 5, they say, hey, bro, you old. And your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the other nations. Now again, at first glance, this don't seem, they're not wrong to not want Samuel's sons as judges over them. These kids are corrupt. They don't fit the bill. They're out of God's alignment. They are not as holy, filled, and revering of the Lord God as their father is. So yeah, they don't fit. They're not wrong for that. I would go even a step further and say they're not wrong to want a king. Let me prove it. It's not that they were out of God's will to want a king. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Deuteronomy, at the time of Moses, when all this first began for them, there were specific instructions so that when they got into the promised land and they were living there and expanding, God knew at some point he was gonna appoint a king, and he placed rule sets. He placed a code of conduct in which they would choose the king, and the king would act. However, this is not the intent that they were looking for or that they were acting out of. They said, we want a king like everybody else got a king. And just in that little bit, you have this whole part. Your sons aren't fit. They don't follow your ways. You're getting older. You can't handle this anymore. But we want what everybody else got. Do you see how quickly that turned? How quickly that turned. They were blinded by this desire to be just like the other nations. And because they were blinded by this desire, because their reasoning, again, how quickly we forget that God knows the heart. Because of this faulty reasoning, they had this idea, and I hope that you can get this, they had this idea that they were missing out on something. They saw what the other nations had. We're missing out on something. Because of the way that we are, we're missing out on something. But they weren't missing out on anything. Israel, you have a king. His name is Yahweh. Israel, you have a king who has led you thus far. Israel, you have a king. As a matter of fact, you have such a great king that every other nation should be jealous of the one that you have. Your king has never lost a battle. Your king has been there for generation after generation. You have the greatest king that anyone could ever have to this date. Yet because my king don't look like everybody else's, I feel that I'm missing out on something. They wanted a man in place instead of God to be their king, because again, this is the time of judges. A judge, again, did not take the title and then pass it down like a king would. They wouldn't have this board in this kingdom like a king would. As a matter of fact, Gideon, back in the book of Judges, if you want to see the heart of what a judge is like, Gideon in the book of Judges, they were begging him to be king, and he said, I'm not finna be your king. I want to be your king, and neither will my sons. God will lead you. I did what I'm supposed to, and I'm finna go home. God leads both of us. I'm not going to be your king. I'm not going to rule over you. God rules over us. And this is the heart and mind of a judge. Let's read verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds, this hurts. According to all the deeds that they have done, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, they have forsaken me and have served other gods. So they are also doing to you. Again, how quickly we forget that God knows the actual intent of the heart. And sometimes you and I will phrase prayers in such a way that seems we would phrase prayers in a way that seems like our intent isn't what it is. And then we sit there and wonder, well, God, why didn't you answer? Baby. Oh. Because he knows. Now, here's the scary thing. We're going to get to this in a little bit. God knows the intent. And he has to reassure Samuel, again, a man who has lived by God's way his entire life. He's bothered by this ask from the Israelites. Son, they've denied me from the day I brought them out of Egypt. They have made and fashioned themselves other gods. They have turned away from me time and time again. They've walked away from me time and time again. And time again, I've had to bring them back in repeatedly over and over and over and over again. It's not you that they're rejecting. They're rejecting the one that you serve. And if I could do a little side note real quick. Hey, Christian, why are you so surprised when you're denied? As if the one that you serve has not been denied since the day this world began. And if you read your Bible beforehand, it's some angels missing up out of heaven. Why are you surprised? I'm not saying that it's still not going to hurt. I'm just saying don't be surprised when people act like people. They have rejected me. God was Israel's king, but they have rejected their king because the king don't look like, don't operate like, they don't have a man to behold. But he tells them to heed the voice of the people. Here's the scary part. Talking about how we fashion our prayers. What happens if he lets you get what you ask for? When your intent is not where it's supposed to be. Terrifying. Sometimes he lets you get what you ask for. And then you find out, oh, the grass ain't greener over here at all. I'm worse off than I was before. God, why would you let me have this? You asked for it. God lets it go on. And here's what he says. Let him have it. Appoint the king. Let him choose. But here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell them exactly how this king is going to act. And it is going to be terrible. It's going to be awful. And they're going to cry out for me, and I'm not going to hear it. Why? To teach a lesson. I don't know about you. I've had one too many lessons. I've had enough lessons at this point of the Lord literally beating my behind. I've had enough. Literally, that last one was so bad. I said, God, you know what? I'm good. I'm never going to let this happen again. I'm going to let you know that. If I ever even take one step left outside of your will, please just tell me right then. You don't put me back in the original way it was supposed to be in the garden. You tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. I'm not doing this whole runaround thing again. I'm good. I'm all right. I'm all right. So this begs the question between you and me, right? I could go in about intent and things like that, but I think the better question is, who have you made king? And again, we could go into money, we could go to job, we can go into lust, we can go into relationship, we can go into all of that. But I think all of that gets squashed if we ask a better question. When are you going to stop being your king? Oh, we quiet. Okay. All right. All right. I'm gonna keep cooking and hopefully we're going to eat here soon. When are you going to stop being your king? When will you and I stop being our own king? Because all of this other stuff will be squashed. Because if I'm king of my life, I can decree I want this and I shall have it whenever I want to. If I'm my own king, then I can step out and say, you know what, God, my relationship with you will flourish when I say it's going to flourish. I'm going to give my time when I have time. I'm going to make time when I want to make time. If I'm my own king, I can go whatever way I want to and make it God's will in my own mind. You know how many times we step into a direction and we go, yes, God did this for me. And God said, I ain't got nothing to do with it. And then you get there and it seems great, and then slowly but surely the walls start coming down and your sight, the rose-tinted glasses come off and you go, oh, how did I get here? How did I end up in this position? Because I'm king. How can he be king over my life if I'm still wearing a crown? We just sang it all together. I know it's not much, but I've got nothing else fit for a king. But as soon as that song's over and we walk out of here, that crown that we put down at his feet, we pick it right back up. No, I don't. Here's how easy it is. I want something, God says no, and all it takes, or I don't want something and God says go, All it takes is the very moment where a request or a desire is out of place and out of his timing. And I've picked back up my crown. God, you promised me this. If you go back through the Bible, you will see over and over and over and over again us try to make his promises come true in our timing. Abraham and Sarah, God promised you a child. It ain't going to happen. Go sleep with Hagar. Now they have this whole separate line that has been warring with them for generations. We want a king. And then they describe this king. The Bible describes here. It's not going to be up here, but the Bible describes him in as a king who is just going to take and take and take and take. And a king that God is, or the way that he acts, is a God that gives and gives and gives and gives. He says, cool, you want a king that's not me? Let me show you who you're going to be working with. All he's going to do is take from you. And even when you think that he's providing for you, his intent is to provide for himself. Because somewhere in the timeline, God was already raising up a king, a little shepherd boy somewhere. But because we want it now, then you get Saul. I hope y'all can get where we're going with this. Do we understand that submitting our crown is fine, but do we have the discipline and the obedience and submission to not pick it back up? Because then God gonna let you have it. And sometimes I have to remind myself of the days when I ruled over me. In the things that I made come to pass, in the placements that I said and I decreed, I'm going to have this, and everything that I tried to place in my life, and every statute that I tried to live by, and every way that I would go. And sometimes I look back at that because I have to remind myself so that I don't forget and try to back up my crown. Because when I place my crown next to his, for some reason, it is so lackluster. And it's filled with memories of me stepping outside of his will. It's filled with memories of me denying him for something that was trying to kill me. And I remind myself, wait a minute. When did my crown save me? When did my crown heal me? When did my crown give me everlasting life? When was my crown there for me? When did my crown pick me up? And I can go into all of these things that about how, we lead ourselves into tragedy and stuff like that. But I want to talk to a different type of person this morning, hoping that I can reach a broader audience. I want to talk to the person who trusts their own judgment more than they trust anything else. Friend, you who would have always felt that you've led yourself quite well. I've always made good decisions. I've never been hasty. I've always done well for myself. Look at where I've built me. I've always done right by God, so, I'm a good person. Friend, first of all, that's called pride, and if I could give you a little insight, there's a certain individual who was in heaven and got shot out of it for that very same pride. You might not be out of the woods yet. I've always led me well. But again, my friend, at what point has your judgment ever saved your everlasting life? At what point did your judgment die on a cross with the most brutal type of murder, let's call it that, punishment that ever existed, the most shameful type of punishment at that time. Roman citizens couldn't even say the name of it in public. It was so shameful. When did your judgment, when did your crown, when did your ability to decide ever save your everlasting life? It can't. It can't. So I'm telling you, what the next course of action is for you and me is to take that crown that we're so fond of and throw it back at his feet. And if I've got to keep my head down and my knees bowed so that I look at the floor and not try to be tempted to pick it back up, then so be it. It's not worth what you think it's worth. If it were worth what you thought it was worth, he would not have had to die. And if it could sustain like you believe it sustains, then he would not be resurrected. And if it could do what you thought it could do, then you would not have had to be reborn in him. Some of us right now can recall, or you might be in it. You might be in the moment where you got exactly what you prayed for. And it don't feel like it's supposed to feel. It don't look how we believed it was going to look. You're going, God, what's going on? My friend, you might be being taught a lesson right now. But the beautiful thing about him is, when you learn, let me use that southern, you learned. I done learned like I learned never before. But when I learn, God, I understand, and he sees the truth of your heart. Then we move. Then we move. God, I don't understand why it's not happening yet. Let me do it. God, you promised it to me. I did. Let me do it. Well, what do I do in the meantime? What's the last thing he told you to do? Stay there until he tells you to move. He hasn't told me to do anything. He told you to love one another as yourself, and he told you to love the Lord your God. That's a great place to start, and it's a great place to stay. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to skip down to verse 19, and I'm going to close. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. He just told them exactly what kind of king they were going to have. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. They gave a description. Look at this description again. There shall be a king over us, and our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. If we pull back a few pages and we go back to Exodus, I'm seeing a king that judges over them, that leads them, that directs them, that provides for them, I don't know, miracle manna from heaven, waters in the desert from a rock, gets them away from the most deadliest army that has ever existed in that time. I'm repeatedly seeing a king who fights your battles and you win. I'm repeatedly seeing a miracle worker. I'm repeatedly seeing a king over you, Israel. Who are you looking for? Here's what happens. We're so blinded by our desires. We're so blinded by the way that the desire that we want that we can't even tell that the very description of the thing that we're looking for, he already has. I just want to be happy. Friend, he's got a joy that has never been broken. I'm just so tired of everything. Friend, he's got a peace that doesn't make sense here. That the wind and waves are thrashing about, and I still trust him. If we really trusted in his kingship, if we really trusted in his throne, here's what would break down, because here's where a lot of us get tripped up. But we need resources. I need provision. If you really trusted in his crown, that would not be the state of your heart. Because I look back over my life and I see provision after provision after provision. I'm just so afraid. I look back over my life and I see where he held my hand and he never let me go. I just want love. He's the manufacturer of love. My kingship, me sitting on the throne of my life, has never done anything in comparison to what he's done for me. And if there's anything that I want you to leave this room with today, it's that take another look at your crown and drop it at his feet and leave it. It doesn't do what you think it does anymore. He's a better king. He's a better king. I trust him. I love him. I need a miracle. His crown, every jewel is filled with miracles. If you take a look at your request again, you'll find that at the smallest building block of most of our desires, outside of sin, is something that he can provide that's better. And I want to make sure that you understand this. I'm not talking material things. He's better. He's better. Well, what do I do? If you make way for the king to come in, he'll come. We're standing in the room. Let's stand. If you make way for the king to come in, he will come. What a wonderful a message from the Lord to be here on Family Day with. That each and every one of us in our household, our friends, could gather together today and challenge one another and say, friend, I don't want to keep my crown anymore. Lord, is there anything in my life in which I am so desperate for that I have decided I'm going to pick it back up again? For some of us, here's what this looks like. You got a cycle that keeps running back in your life. Guess what you're doing? I'm picking that crown back up. Every time I want to feel the urge, scratch the itch. But then when you're wearing it, when you're in that action, when you're back in that cycle, it's gut-wrenching because you thought the last time would be the last time. This time can. All it takes is to have the obedience to leave your crown at his feet. God, I don't want to be king anymore. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes.